Next, we'll talk about exponents. The exponent tells how many times a number is multiplied by itself. An exponent is read 2 to the 5th power. What that means is the 2 is multiplied times itself 5 times. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 32. Be careful, a common mistake that I'll see is to just multiply the numbers. This is a common wrong answer, 6. You see why that's wrong? You don't just do 2 times 3. What you're really doing is 2 times itself 3 times. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 again is 8. So in the above example, 2 is the base, 5 is the exponent. 2 to the 5th power. 2 is the base, 3 is the exponent, 2 to the 3rd power. When you have something to the 2nd power, for example, 3 to the 2nd power, it is sometimes read 3 squared. It means 3 times itself, 3 times 3, or 9. If you have -4 to the 3rd power, that means -4 times itself 3 times. Sometimes when you have things raised to the 3rd power, it's called cubed, -4 cubed. So 4 times 4 would be 16, and a negative times a negative would be a positive, so that would be positive 16. And then positive 16 times -4. Would be a negative 64. Sometimes you don't want to do all that math by hand, so you can use a calculator. For example, 6 to the 5th power. On a scientific calculator, there are a few keys that you can use. One looks like this, the little caret. So you would type 6 to the 5th power. Sometimes the exponent key looks like one of these two. Again, you would just type 6 and then that key to the 5th power. Let's talk about some interesting examples. 2 to the 1st just means 2 by itself. So the answer is just 2. Anything to the 1st power is itself. 2 to the 0 power is 1. Anything to the 0 power is 1. So if you add 353 to the 0 power, your answer would be 1. You can test that on a calculator. Sometimes these give students problems when the negative is in parentheses and when the negative is out of parentheses. When the negative is in parentheses, that means the whole thing gets raised to the 3rd power. So that means -2 gets multiplied by itself by -2 3 times. -2 times -2 times -2, which would be -8. A negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative makes it negative. So this one, again, since it's in the parentheses, it would be -2 raised to the 4th power. So the whole thing, the whole -2 times itself 4 times. So -2 times -2. A negative times a negative is a positive, so that's +4. Times a negative, so that'd be -8. So then -8 times -2 would be +16. Notice that if I have an even number of negative signs, my answer turns out to be positive. If I have an odd number, it turns out to be negative. This one is the tricky one. We may come back to this when we talk about order of operation next. But when you have a -2 to the 4th, what happens in mathematics is we do exponents before we do minusing or negatives. So what happens is the first thing you do is actually 2 to the 4th. 2 times itself 4 times, and then afterward you apply the negative sign. So we would do 2 to the 4th and then make the answer negative. So this would be negative 16. Note the difference between these two. In math, we have a certain order that we do operations. So you don't just work from left to right. Certain things take precedence over the others. For example, parentheses come before adding. So we remember this. Some people use the phrase, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Some use the phrase PEMDAS. And I'll show you what these mean. The P stands for parentheses. That's what comes first. Also in this level are fraction bars. And absolute value signs. Okay. So that's the first level. That's what you do first. The next level is the E, which stands for exponents. Next comes the MD. That's actually together on one level. Multiply and divide. That comes next. Just because the M is before the D actually doesn't mean that it goes multiplication then division. They're actually on the same level. So what if there's multiplication and division both in a problem? Then you work left to right. Last but not least, addition and subtraction. Just like multiplication and division, they are not on two separate levels, they're together. So if there is addition and subtraction both in a problem, again, you work left to right. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. Let's do some problems. Example 1. Which would come first, addition or multiplication? Well, multiplication comes first. One thing that I do when I am doing these problems is I underline and replace. So I would underline this part, 15. 3 times 5 is 15. And then replace that. So I have 2 plus 15. So my answer would be 17. Over here, example 2. The parenthesis goes first. So I do whatever's in the parenthesis first. So that would be 5 times 5 would be 25. Let's skip to example 4. I'm not going to work through this whole example, but I wanted to point out that the fraction bar means divide, and it acts like parentheses. So we would do this top and bottom piece first in the same level that we would do the parentheses in. So we'd have 12 divided by 3 here. Okay. If you want to work this one out on your own, the answer should be 4. Let's go to example 3. First thing, what does it mean when the 24 is right next to that parenthesis? A multiplication is assumed there. So I have a minus, a multiplication, a parenthesis with a subtract, a divide, and an exponent. So first is the parenthesis. 8 minus 5 is 3. So I'll underline and replace. I will replace that 8 minus 5 with a 3. Next, exponents. 2 to the second power is 4. So I underline and replace. Next, multiplication and division. And I work left to right. So I would do this one first. 24 times 3. Which is 72. So I've replaced the 24 times 3 with the 72. Next, I don't subtract, I divide first. Division comes before subtraction. So 72 divided by 4 is 18. So I'll have 12 minus 18. Notice how I work downward. We do this a lot in algebra, so it's good to get used to it here. And then I underline and replace in the order of operation. 12 minus 18 is negative 6. Where will you see order of operation? I'm going to show you a few places. The first is a test question that students often get wrong. Look at these two students and how they worked their problem. Anne is the incorrect one. She did 6 minus 4 and got 2. Then did 2 divided by 2 and got 1, and 1 plus 7 is 8. What did she do wrong? She went just left to right. You don't do that. When you're doing order of operation, you have to go by the levels. So parentheses first, then exponents, then multiplication, division, then last but not least, addition, subtraction. So she should start with the division. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Then move to the addition and subtraction. 6 minus 2 is 4. 4 plus 7 is 11. Beth has the right answer. Another place we use order of operation is in chapter 2, or in a later module of this class, when we simplify operations. So here's a problem that you might see where we are simplifying algebraic expressions. Students want to do this 9 minus 3 first, but that's not what to do. We're going to practice over here without the variables. So what should come first here? Remember that in between the 5 and that parenthesis is an implied multiplication sign. First should come the 4 plus 5, 9. 8 minus 5 times 9. Next should come the multiplication. Five times 9 is 45. Then 8 minus 45, negative 37. Similarly here, first the parenthesis. So I will have 9 minus 3. There's a multiplication implied right between the 3 and the parenthesis, times 10. Then the multiplication. 3 times 10 is 30. So 9 minus 30, which is negative 21. Another example where we use order of operation comes from a stats table. This is from an Intro to Stats course that we have here at Fond du Lac. What the student is supposed to do is take the number out of the frequency column and times it by the midpoint squared. F times the midpoint squared. Here's the formula. So this, 2 times 13 squared. So many people do 2 times 13 and get 26 and then square that. This is incorrect. Exponents should come first. The 13 should be squared first. So you should get 2 times 169. 338. Right here in the column. Again, don't worry about this column. I want you to practice on these so that when you see this in another math class or a science class, you will know what to do. So again, you don't do 6 times 2 and then square it. You have to do the exponent first. 2 squared is 4. So you do 6 times 4. 24.